Give the call to the member for Lalor.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I too rise to speak on the Customs Amendment Anti-Dumping Measures Bill No. 1 2015. And I'd like to thank the Parliamentary Secretary, Member for Paterson, for the implicit praise for the Labor Party policy in our last government and embrace the bipartisan approach to this policy area, because it is important, Deputy Speaker. This is an important issue for my electorate, where Arium and One Steel live. It's an important policy for Victoria, for our manufacturing base. It's an important policy to Australians. And last week, Deputy Speaker, I had an interesting meeting with the director of O'Brien Boilers, a local boy whose company, O'Brien Boilers, is situated in Sunshine in the neighbouring electorate. He's a proud business owner and director in our area who's innovating and developing some outstanding solutions to energy production across Australia. This business, Deputy Speaker, prides itself on quality, and having tried cheaper imported products, particularly steel, find the short-term benefit of the cheaper price is a false economy, as the quality doesn't stand up over time. The long-term maintenance costs cancel out the short-term gain in production. In the west of Melbourne, an area proudly represented by many on this side of the House, anti-dumping laws are vital to ensure our local industries are competing on a level field. But while some businesses, Deputy Speaker, have the capacity to make that judgment call, many competing on tight margins don't feel that they can. And this can have very detrimental impacts on business and, as we've seen over recent reports, on consumers. The recent example, and one I'm sure we'll hear a little tonight, is in the electrical space, and it demonstrates the danger of product dumping in Australia. It's the story of cheap imported cabling. This cheap Chinese cabling, imported and sold in most of our major hardware stores, has been used by electricians in the domestic building market. A small price gain for electricians competing for business that is usually awarded on cost. The problem is this cabling has been recalled due to the inferior quality and the product becoming brittle and thus having the potential to start house fires. But how do you go about recalling electrical cabling? Most homeowners wouldn't know what brand cable was used when their house was being built, so they are unlikely to make a claim. And what of the impact on the local cabling manufacturers? They clearly lost business while this went on. Did they lose jobs as well? And then there's the question of whose cost will the replacement be done? Surely not the poor electrician. Is it the hardware retailer that supplied the substandard product? Will it be the original Chinese company? That probably explains why the 4,000 kilometres of defective electric cabling known to have been utilised, only 15.5 kilometres has been withdrawn. That's less than 0.5% has been recalled of this dodgy product. These examples show, Deputy Speaker, why in government Labor had a strong record of protecting industry from dumping. And sure, it's important for our manufacturing industries, as we've already heard and will no doubt continue to hear, but it's also important for the average Australian consumer and the average Australian job. Deputy Speaker, Labor established the Anti-Dumping Commission in 2013 after previously implementing anti-dumping legislation, and on several occasions amended that legislation to ensure it was focused and effective, and we welcome further work in this area. And a recent example of the good work of the Commission is shown in the recent case involving Capral Aluminium, as we've just heard. It's a company significantly impacted by the rise of cheap Chinese aluminium being dumped into Australia for several years. The company could probably be partly credited with the former government's decision to establish the Anti-Dumping Commission. Capral is a quality business with state-of-the-art facilities and a strong, well-trained workforce. It was heavily impacted when the cheap Chinese aluminium being imported required only a 7% import duty on its product, when other countries were routinely charging 30–60%. Capral brought this case to the Anti-Dumping Commission and recently received welcome news when Commissioner Dale Seymour found the biggest Chinese exporter, Pan Asia Aluminium, had indeed circumvented anti-dumping measures, and as a result, the Industry Minister, Ian Macfarlane, approved a steep rise in duties. This is an example of the anti-dumping system working well in Australia's interest. This case also shows that free trade agreements do allow for anti-dumping duties to be imposed when this dumping threatens to cause material injury to an Australian industry. And Deputy Speaker, apparently the US aluminium extrusion industry is enjoying a resurgence thanks to duties averaging 33%, but ranging as high as 400% on Chinese product. China managed to capture 20% of the US market by late 2009, but duties imposed since 2010 have crunched that to less than 1%. Let's hope, Deputy Speaker, we have a similar outcome in Australia. Because, Deputy Speaker, markets are tough places, and Australia must play hard and fair. And this legislation, our anti-dumping legislation, ensures that we will be playing hard and fair. And fair means not allowing countries to dump and flood our markets in the short term with a long-term view to kill off our industries, particularly where our quality is superior and necessary for safety. So, Deputy Speaker, this legislation that works to build on Labor's proud record is a step in the right direction. We also welcome some new initiatives proposed for introduction through regulation. We welcome the establishment of Anti-Dumping Information Service. We welcome the expansion of the International Trade Remedies Advisory Service. We welcome the establishment of a market research function to enhance anti-dumping investigators' capabilities, and we welcome a central hotline for inquiries about Australia's anti-dumping systems, because, as we've heard before, these are complex areas of law. Labor welcomes these as sensible measures. They will assist Australian industries to get information and start proceedings where dumping threatens material injury to an Australian company. There are, however, some aspects of the legislation that Labor does not support. We do not support the abolition of the International Trade Remedies Forum. This forum, Deputy Speaker, brings together representatives from manufacturers, producers and importers, as well as industry associations, trade unions and some government agencies. This forum was established in 2011 and formalised in June 2013 and was designed to provide strategic advice and feedback to the government during the implementation of proposed reforms. It's the stakeholder body that gave good feedback to government throughout those reforms. Its existence ensures continued engagement across the sectors. It ensures that all voices are heard and that the processes and penalties are constantly reviewed. It's an important forum. It's an important piece of the puzzle to ensure that those conversations continue. It is a feedback and ideas mechanism, something governments should value, particularly in the protection of our industries. Its continuation would ensure valuable dialogue between industries continues into the future. And given the current government supported the establishment of the forum when in opposition, and given there was never a discussion about its abolition during the election campaign, Labor is not sure why it is now proposed to abolish this forum. This body was constructive, had bipartisan support and did good work. I know Labor will suggest amendments in the Senate that ensures its ongoing capacity. The so-called increase in flexibility for stakeholder engagement the government seeks could easily be accommodated with the forum's current structures. We also have reservations about the introduction of fees. This second aspect of the legislation is the ability to charge a fee for review when making an application for the review of an anti-dumping practice. Whilst there is some justification for a fee for service, the introduction of fees may have a negative impact, particularly for small businesses wanting to bring forward a case. This introduction of fees also goes against the Coalition's election policy. The Coalition's policy to boost the competitiveness of Australian manufacturing stated that the current anti-dumping laws are cumbersome, slow and prohibitively expensive for many Australian businesses to utilise. The introduction of a fee, therefore, seems to be counterproductive against that idea. And given later this week the government plans to introduce a further round of red tape repeal, why is this hindrance on business being introduced? Despite arguments that they are mostly triggered by importers, it could still be a barrier for local business. Deputy Speaker, I want the businesses in my area to be growing and innovating, and many already do this. The dumping of cheap imports into Australia, in my view, achieves so little. A cheap, short-term gain has been shown to be negated by long-term quality issues. We need to have a strong anti-dumping legislative framework to assist our local businesses to compete in this level playing field. mostly, from my perspective, to ensure hard-won jobs are secure into the future. Because, of course, in the west of Melbourne, these are good jobs, important jobs, and jobs that we need to ensure continue. I therefore support the legislation, but question the two pieces that might see the laws and the Commission less effective. We have already seen, even where successful claims have been made and prosecuted, that local jobs have been lost. So, keeping in measures that will ensure that there is continued conversation that includes all the important stakeholders, and when I say all the important stakeholders, I of course include the unions. And I include the unions because of my local, very local experience, where the unions, particularly in steel and aluminium, are working productively, collaboratively with business to protect the industry and to protect their jobs. And a fee for review might discourage business, particularly small business, from prosecuting a case. So I have concerns there. The abolition of the International Trade Remedies Forum would hinder the responsiveness of government, or could potentially hinder the responsiveness of government. Ensuring regular contact and dialogue with all stakeholders, including the unions, is critical to ensuring government remains responsive to this very live and shifting issue. As we've heard earlier, this is a very complex area of law, and so it remains live, and there will be more loopholes found, I am sure. Deputy Speaker, I welcome the government's continuation of Labor's hard policy and legislative work in this area, as do businesses, as does industry and unions in my electorate. In fact, this area of anti-dumping sees intense collaboration between business and unions. All are working hard, Deputy Speaker, to stay competitive, to work together to ensure the viability of the businesses and the jobs they have created. I commend the bill to the House, but suggest amendments on the two areas. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank